The document had been missing for 18 months. Almost nobody outside a handful of senior palace officials even knew it existed, which made its disappearance easier to hide, but no less catastrophic. In the final weeks of her life, Queen Elizabeth had quietly written a private will, separate from her official estate documents, containing instructions about family matters she wanted handled in very precise ways. When archivists finally uncovered evidence suggesting the will had been deliberately destroyed, a full-scale investigation was launched, one that would expose what might be the most shocking revelation in modern royal history. Security footage, recovered emails, and witness testimony all pointed toward the same two individuals, creating a storm of suspicion that would ripple through the palace. The royal archives at Windsor Castle were a treasure trove of history, holding hundreds of thousands of documents spanning centuries of monarchy. Each was carefully catalogued and preserved according to strict protocols established long before anyone currently working there was born. Senior archivists had long understood that they were custodians of history, guarding material that, if lost or damaged, could never be replaced. A responsibility taken as seriously as life itself. It was during a routine inventory check, one of the annual audits designed to ensure that nothing had gone missing, that the first discrepancy appeared. A document listed in the Queen's final year registry was nowhere to be found in its designated location. The initial assumption was simple misfiling, a common occurrence in a collection so vast. But when archivists broadened their search, scanning surrounding files and related collections, the document remained unaccounted for. The registry provided almost no details, only a personal memorandum dated 3 weeks before Queen Elizabeth's death, marked with her highest privacy classification. That classification meant very few people would have been authorized to access it, making its disappearance all the more alarming. The head archivist reported the missing file to her supervisor, who escalated the matter through proper channels until it reached the King's private secretary. What had begun as a minor administrative concern was now spiraling toward what could become a constitutional crisis. The private secretary immediately realized that this was not a case of simple misfiling. Documents with that level of classification simply did not vanish. They had either been deliberately removed, or they had never been properly filed in the first place, and either scenario raised serious, uncomfortable questions. The secretary requested security logs to determine who had entered the archives during the relevant period. The results were unexpected. Queen Camilla had visited the archives twice in the months following Elizabeth's death, once accompanied by her daughter, Laura Lopes. Both visits were officially logged, complete with proper authorization codes. Yet neither woman had any apparent reason to be in the archives at that time, when the family was still grappling with grief and transition. The private secretary brought the information to King Charles during a routine briefing, carefully presenting it as a matter requiring clarification rather than accusation. Charles was stunned. He had no idea Camilla had visited the archives and could not imagine why she would do so without mentioning it. When confronted directly, Camilla appeared genuinely puzzled, claiming she had no memory of the visits and suggesting the logs might be mistaken. Charles ordered a full investigation, determined to uncover the truth without rushing to judgment. A small team of security experts and legal advisors was assembled to reconstruct the events and track down the missing document. They began by interviewing every archive staff member on duty at the time, and then examined security footage, a step initially skipped because there had been no suspicion of criminal activity. The footage was grainy, with cameras mostly monitoring entrances rather than interior aisles, but enough remained to confirm that Camilla and Laura had indeed been present. They spent significant time in the section where the missing document should have been stored, and left carrying materials they had not brought in. Charles watched the footage in stunned silence. His face betrayed nothing, yet those present described his stillness as almost terrifying, the kind of controlled shock that only comes when the mind struggles to absorb a reality too vast to comprehend immediately. When the footage ended, Charles asked one simple but monumental question: what was in the missing document? Investigators admitted they did not know for certain, as the registry entry provided minimal detail, but references in other files suggested the document concerned the Queen's private wishes regarding family matters, including instructions about relationships and potential future arrangements within the family structure. This revelation triggered a memory for Charles. In one of their last private conversations, Elizabeth had mentioned wanting to put certain things in writing so her wishes could not be disputed. After her death, Charles had assumed she was referring to her official will, properly executed and filed, but now he wondered if she had created something separate, something far more personal that addressed matters the official will could not or should not touch. The implications were staggering. King Charles authorized the investigation to expand, bringing in additional resources and authority. He needed to know exactly what had been destroyed, why, and whether Camilla had acted alone or with others. Most importantly, he needed to know if his wife had betrayed not just the monarchy, but also his mother's memory and his own trust. Weeks of careful work followed, during which Charles had to maintain a normal public appearance while internally preparing for the possibility that his marriage was built on foundations far shakier than he had ever imagined. The truth, when it finally emerged, would be worse than anything he had allowed himself to fear. Investigators methodically interviewed anyone who might have had knowledge of Queen Elizabeth's final months and her intentions regarding personal documentation, private secretaries, doctors, ladies-in-waiting, anyone close enough to have heard her discuss such a document. A key secretary confirmed the explosive truth. The Queen had indeed created a private will in her final weeks, working personally with a trusted solicitor who had served the family for decades. It was designed specifically to cover matters the official estate documents could not, addressing personal wishes about family dynamics and future arrangements. The secretary had been present when the document was finalized, witnessing the Queen sign it. Her trembling hands betrayed both her weakening physical state and fierce determination. The will was then sealed and placed in the archives under the highest security classification, to be opened only upon the Queen's death and to be read first by the new monarch before any others. The revelation became even more explosive when the secretary disclosed a critical detail. The will contained explicit instructions regarding Camilla's role in the family going forward. Queen Elizabeth had serious private reservations about Camilla becoming Queen Consort. While she had suppressed them publicly for the sake of family unity, she had insisted on recording them privately. The will stipulated that while Charles could marry Camilla, there were strict conditions on her holding the title of Queen. Elizabeth wanted guarantees that Camilla would not interfere with succession, would maintain distance from certain state functions, and would understand her role was contingent on respecting the institution above personal ambition. The news hit Charles like a physical blow. His mother had publicly supported the marriage, but these private restrictions revealed her doubts were significant enough to write into law. The document's destruction meant those safeguards were gone. If Camilla had known the will's contents and destroyed it to eliminate the restrictions, it would have been a betrayal of breathtaking audacity. It implied she valued her position and freedom from limitations over respect for a dying woman who had been queen for 70 years. The investigation intensified. Investigators needed to prove not just that the document had been destroyed, but that Camilla and Laura had known its contents and deliberately targeted it. This required uncovering how they had learned about the will and its instructions. The breakthrough came via digital forensics, examining Camilla's personal computer with full legal authorization. Once suspicion of criminal intent emerged, investigators found deleted emails, imperfectly erased. Dated shortly after Queen Elizabeth's death, the emails showed correspondence between Camilla and Laura, discussing a document that concerned both of them, using vague language, but clearly referring to something in the archives. One email from Laura to Camilla was especially damning. It referenced locating the document in question and casually asked whether they should proceed with the plan. Camilla's response was brief, but chilling. Yes? Take care of it completely. No trace. The message, recovered through painstaking forensic analysis, was short, precise, and terrifying in its clarity. The emails never explicitly named the will, likely because both women understood the danger of leaving clear evidence, but the timing, the context, and the subsequent disappearance of the document formed a circumstantial case that was powerful, almost undeniable. Investigators still needed more to confirm Camilla's involvement and her intent beyond any reasonable doubt. The proof appeared in the archives themselves. Advanced forensic analysis of the storage area where the will should have been revealed, traces of ash absent during routine cleanings. Prior to Camilla and Laura's visits, chemical testing confirmed that the residue came from high-quality paper, matching that used for official royal documents. It wasn't just removed. It had been destroyed by fire, likely in one of the archive's rarely used but fully functional fireplaces. Burning a document suggested premeditation and an understanding that only complete destruction would erase the Queen's instructions entirely. A statement from a maintenance worker filled in the final piece. The worker recalled being asked by a well-dressed woman matching Laura's description to light a fire in one of the archive fireplaces on a specific date. She had claimed she was cold and needed warmth while working. The worker complied without suspicion, unaware of the document's fate, but the timing lined up perfectly with one of Laura's visits. The location? Exactly where the will should have been stored. The woman had stayed alone with the fire for nearly half an hour, plenty of time to reduce a delicate royal document to ash, ensuring no fragments remained. When the full evidence was presented to Charles, the case against Camilla and Laura was overwhelming, though not yet legally airtight. There was physical evidence of their presence, digital proof of planning, forensic traces of destruction, and eyewitness testimony placing them at the scene. What remained uncertain was the degree of Camilla's involvement. Had she initiated the plan, or was she drawn in by Laura? The distinction mattered, legally and personally. Charles needed clarity on his wife's role and motivations before confronting her. Investigators advised him to face her directly, believing that when confronted with the evidence, Camilla might confess and reveal the missing pieces of her reasoning. Charles wrestled with how to approach the meeting. This was not simply a matter of institutional wrongdoing or criminal behavior. This was his wife, his partner, potentially erasing his mother's final wishes, deceiving him for 18 months and undermining everything their marriage claimed to represent. He could barely reconcile the woman he believed he knew with someone capable of such calculated betrayal. Part of him still clung to hope that there might be an explanation, a context that could soften the damning appearance of her actions. But as he reviewed the evidence over and over, that hope faded. Camilla had conspired with her daughter to eliminate the restrictions Elizabeth had imposed and had lied repeatedly about it. When the truth became undeniable, Charles had to decide what it meant for their future. He arranged a private meeting in his study at Clarence House, a secure location where they could speak without interruption. He simply told her they needed to discuss an urgent matter, offering no hint of the storm about to break. Camilla arrived expecting perhaps a mundane discussion about schedules or family duties. Nothing to prepare her for what Charles was about to reveal. He asked her directly if she had anything to tell him about visits to the royal archives. In the months following his mother's death, Camilla repeated her earlier claim. She didn't remember visiting and suggested the logs must be mistaken. Charles then opened a laptop, played the security footage, and turned the screen toward her. Camilla watched herself move through the archives, and her expression shifted. Confusion gave way to recognition, then something resembling fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but Charles raised a hand. "Please do not insult me with more lies. I have seen the footage. I have read the emails between you and Laura. I know about the fireplace and the ash. I know you destroyed my mother's private will. What I want to understand is why." The words hung heavily between them, charged with pain and accusation. Camilla's composure crumbled. Tears formed as the reality of being caught settled over her. At first, she denied everything, claiming she didn't know what he meant and that there must be some misunderstanding. But Charles was relentless, systematically presenting each piece of evidence. Deleted emails, forensic findings, all lined up. Denial became impossible. Eventually, her defense shifted to justification. She admitted she had learned about the will through a casual comment by a palace staff member who didn't realize the information was sensitive. When she investigated further, discovering Elizabeth's restrictions on her role as queen consort, she felt hurt and angry. The restrictions felt like accusations, like being told she would never be fully accepted. Despite decades of service and dedication, it was Laura who first suggested destroying the document, arguing that Elizabeth's private wishes were private for a reason and carried no legal weight over Charles's decisions. If the will disappeared, the restrictions vanished, allowing Camilla to serve as queen consort without the limitations imposed by someone who had never fully accepted her. Camilla admitted she initially resisted, but eventually convinced herself that eliminating the will was not morally wrong. It simply removed obstacles to fully supporting Charles in his role as king. She told herself it was for the good of the monarchy, that Elizabeth's reservations were unfair, outdated, and should not constrain the future. Charles listened with disbelief and growing disgust. "So you decided that your hurt feelings and your daughter's ambitions justified destroying my mother's last wishes? You decided that you knew better than a woman who had been queen for 70 years? What was good for the monarchy? You decided that your comfort mattered more than respecting the woman whose death made it possible for me to become king, and for you to become queen consort." Camilla tried to defend herself, claiming she had been acting for the monarchy to protect Charles's reign from constraints. Charles cut her off sharply. "Do not dare claim you did this for me. You did this for yourself and Laura, and you lied about it even when you had multiple chances to come clean." The argument escalated, decades of tension surfacing alongside the immediate betrayal. Charles reminded her of her apparent resentment toward not being fully embraced by the family, of her push for status others felt she hadn't earned. Camilla countered, voicing grievances about constant comparisons to Diana, about never being enough, and about sacrificing her own children's privacy for Charles's position. The conversation descended into mutual recriminations, each point of pain and resentment fueling the other, accomplishing nothing except anger and entrenchment. Then Charles said something that silenced the room entirely. "I cannot stay married to someone who would do this." Camilla stared, stunned. The words barely processed at first. As their meaning sank in, panic set in. "Charles, you cannot be serious. We have been together for decades. One mistake cannot undo everything we've built." Charles shook his head firmly. This was not one mistake. This was a calculated betrayal carried out over time, then concealed through lies. "You destroyed something irreplaceable and violated my mother's memory." Camilla begged him to reconsider, warning of the impact on the monarchy, the public image, the chaos it could create. Charles acknowledged the concerns, but said they paled against the fundamental breach of trust. How could he rule with a queen consort he could not trust? When his own wife had shown such disregard for the monarchy's most basic principles, the marriage was over, not because he wanted it to be, but because her actions had made it impossible to continue. He asked her to leave, informing her that solicitors would follow regarding arrangements. Camilla departed in tears, still hoping he might reconsider. But those who knew Charles understood that when he made decisions based on principle rather than emotion, he rarely reversed them. This was not a fleeting anger or impulsive decision. This was a fundamental reassessment of who Camilla was and whether their marriage could survive such a betrayal. The answer he had reached was no, and all that remained was implementing that decision in a way that managed the inevitable public and institutional fallout. Word of the impending divorce leaked within just 48 hours, despite the best efforts of palace staff to maintain secrecy. Employees who noticed that the king and queen were no longer appearing together, who overheard tense and heated conversations, and who spotted legal documents being quietly prepared, began connecting dots and whispering to their colleagues in hushed tones. Those whispers quickly found their way to journalists with sources embedded deep inside royal households. Within hours, media outlets were running stories hinting at a crisis in the marriage. Initial reports were cautious, vague, and speculative, yet they captured the essential truth. Something catastrophic had shattered the union between Charles and Camilla. The palace communications team scrambled frantically, attempting to control the narrative before it spiraled into complete chaos. They faced an almost impossible challenge. The truth that Camilla had destroyed Queen Elizabeth's private will was far too damaging to reveal publicly. Such a disclosure would have obliterated Camilla's reputation beyond repair and raised serious questions about the legitimacy of decisions made in the 18 months since the will's destruction. But without revealing the real reason, how could the public understand why Charles was ending a marriage that had endured for decades? Any explanation that skirted the truth risked spawning rampant speculation and wild conspiracy theories, potentially causing even greater damage than the facts themselves. After exhaustive consultations with Charles, senior advisors, and legal experts, the palace opted to release a statement that was truthful, yet deliberately vague. The statement confirmed that the king and queen consort had agreed to separate due to irreconcilable differences. It emphasized that the decision was mutual, final, and requested privacy from the public. As both parties navigated this difficult transition, the statement raised more questions than it answered, which was inevitable. Yet it managed to avoid outright lies while shielding the most explosive and sensitive details. Media coverage exploded anyway. Endless speculation filled newspapers and social feeds, dissecting what trust or conduct issues could have triggered such a dramatic rupture. Initially, Camilla resisted the divorce, hoping that time might soften Charles's stance. Her lawyers cautioned that fighting the divorce could risk the full truth being exposed in court proceedings, a revelation that would utterly destroy her public image. Accepting the divorce quietly, while preserving some dignity, was the safer route. There remained a narrow chance her reputation could survive relatively intact. The public might assume the split was simply a result of generic marital conflict. Faced with this choice, and with the threat of complete exposure, Camilla reluctantly agreed to expedite the divorce to minimize the legal drama and potential humiliation. The question of how to present her future role proved complex. Technically, divorce would end Camilla's position as queen consort. The palace, however, wanted to avoid the spectacle of a dramatic stripping of titles. Instead, it was quietly indicated that following the divorce, Camilla would revert to her previous title, Duchess of Cornwall. She would retain certain privileges befitting her status as the former wife of the king and the mother-in-law of future monarchs through William's family. Yet she would no longer participate in state functions or officially represent the monarchy. Effectively, she was being eased into obscurity as gently as circumstances allowed, a quiet retreat from public life that still acknowledged her former position. Public reaction to the divorce was sharply divided. Many expressed shock and sympathy, having long believed Charles and Camilla's marriage to be stable and loving. Others, particularly those who had never accepted Camilla as a proper match for the king, expressed satisfaction that the relationship had finally ended. Social media erupted with theories, ranging from fundamental incompatibility to wild claims of affairs or financial intrigue. Very few came close to guessing the truth about the destroyed will, which remained the royal family's most closely guarded secret. William and Catherine found themselves in a delicate position. William had never been particularly close to Camilla, who had tolerated his presence only for his father's sake. Learning what she had done to his grandmother's will confirmed suspicions he had long held, that Camilla prioritized her own interests over the needs of the institution. Yet publicly, he had to maintain neutrality, supporting his father's decision without appearing to celebrate Camilla's downfall. Catherine, ever diplomatic in her dealings with Camilla, expressed private relief that a source of tension had been removed, even as she fretted over the immediate chaos the divorce would create. Prince Harry, contacted in California and briefed on the situation, experienced a complex mixture of emotions. He had his own fraught history with Camilla and had never fully forgiven her role in his parents' marriage breakdown. Yet he recognized his father's genuine pain and sense of betrayal and reached out to Charles directly, one of their first real conversations in years, offering support and understanding for the difficult situation. The exchange was brief, awkward, and tentative, yet it marked a slight thaw in the icy distance between father and son. Shared experience of betrayal forged an unexpected, if fragile, common ground. The months following the announcement were chaotic for everyone involved. Camilla moved out of shared residences and into her private estates, largely disappearing from public view. Her daughter, Laura, whose role in destroying the will remained secret, also withdrew, fully aware that her association with her mother's scandal rendered her toxic in royal circles. The king threw himself into royal duties with renewed intensity, using work as a shield against personal pain. Those close to him described a man who seemed to have aged a decade in mere months, burdened by the cumulative weight of losing first his mother, then his wife's betrayal. 6 months after everything was finalised, King Charles gave his first extended interview since the split. He chose a respected journalist known for serious, thoughtful reporting, rather than tabloid sensationalism, seeking to discuss his decision within measured, meaningful terms. The interview was held at Highgrove, Charles's beloved country estate, a setting that felt personal rather than institutional. He appeared tired, yet resolved, a man who had made peace with a painful decision and was ready to explain his reasoning as far as public disclosure would allow. The journalist asked directly what had led to the divorce after so many years together. Charles's answer was careful but revealing. He spoke about trust being fundamental to any relationship, but especially to a marriage that exists in service of an institution. When trust is violated in ways that cannot be repaired, continuing the marriage becomes impossible, regardless of history, affection, or shared memories. He acknowledged that ending the marriage had been the hardest decision of his life, but insisted it had been necessary. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, not out of vindictiveness, but because they reveal fundamental incompatibility of values, priorities, and understanding. When asked whether he regretted marrying Camilla, Charles paused for a long, deliberate moment before answering. He said he cherished many memories from their years together and did not wish to diminish what had been good about their relationship. Yet, with the clarity of hindsight, he admitted he could see warning signs he had either ignored or minimized at the time. Moments when their different approaches to duty, responsibility, and the institution had created friction should have been examined more carefully and more thoroughly. He had wanted to believe that love could overcome those differences, that personal affection could outweigh conflicting priorities. Events had ultimately proven otherwise. His answer remained diplomatic, but carried a quiet undercurrent of sadness, perhaps even regret, about the energy, time, and emotional investment poured into a relationship that had failed so dramatically despite the years together. The interviewer asked about the future, whether Charles could imagine marrying again. Charles smiled ruefully and said that at his age and in his position, another marriage seemed both unlikely and unwise. He had learned painful lessons about the complexity of blending personal desire with institutional responsibility. His focus now was entirely on his role as king, on serving the nation and the Commonwealth to the best of his ability, and on preparing and supporting the next generation to carry forward the monarchy responsibly. As they prepared to eventually assume the burdens he currently carried, romance and companionship were luxuries he no longer felt entitled to pursue, given the complications and betrayals that had reshaped his life. Behind the scenes, Charles worked tirelessly to ensure that the disaster of the destroyed will could never be repeated. He ordered comprehensive reviews of archive security, implemented new protocols, required multiple authorizations to access sensitive documents, and installed more extensive camera coverage. Working with legal advisors, he drafted his own private will, drawing from his mother's experiences and mistakes. This will was not just signed and sealed, but placed in multiple secure copies at separate locations, making it virtually impossible for anyone to destroy every version. The provisions he included addressed many of the same concerns his mother had worried about, ensuring his wishes regarding family matters would be known and honoured, regardless of what happened after his death. The question of what to do about Laura Lopes remained unresolved. She had been instrumental in destroying the will, possibly even the instigator, yet revealing her role publicly would serve no purpose beyond satisfying curiosity. For complete transparency, Charles decided that Laura's exile from royal circles and the effective destruction of her mother's position were punishment enough. Pursuing criminal charges would require revealing what had been destroyed, a step he remained unwilling to take for the sake of the institution. So Laura lived privately with her guilt and diminished circumstances, a form of justice that was incomplete, yet perhaps sufficient given the complexity of the situation. During this turbulent period, William gradually assumed a more prominent role. understanding that his father needed both personal support and a visible symbol of stability for the institution. He and Catherine increased their public appearances and took on additional responsibilities, providing continuity and positive public messaging to offset the divorce's negative impact. William also had frank conversations with his father about succession planning and the importance of ensuring clear, documented wishes that could not be disputed or destroyed. Father and son grew closer through the crisis, finding common ground in their shared commitment to protecting the monarchy and upholding institutional integrity. Charles privately acknowledged the irony. He had spent decades defending his relationship with Camilla against critics who had claimed she was inappropriate for a future king. He had insisted on marrying her despite family concerns and institutional advice, and now he had divorced her precisely because she had betrayed the institution's trust. He had asked everyone to trust her to serve faithfully, and the arc of that story felt almost Shakespearean in its tragedy and irony. Yet Charles had learned something crucial through the pain. Personal happiness could not come at the cost of institutional integrity. When forced to choose between his wife and his mother's legacy, between his comfort and his duty, he chose duty. It was the choice his late mother herself would have made, and in doing so, Charles finally felt he had earned the right to wear the crown she had passed to him. Some would argue that he should have found a way to forgive, to maintain the marriage while implementing safeguards to prevent future misconduct. Others would defend his choice as principled and correct, insisting that some betrayals are too fundamental to overlook. Charles himself spent little time revisiting the decision once it had been made. He had acted in accordance with his values, guided by his understanding of what the monarchy required. Whether history judged him kindly or harshly mattered far less than knowing he had done what he believed was right, a certainty that had been hard-won and painfully achieved. The whole truth remains hidden behind palace walls, even now known only to those who lived through it. If this revelation about royal betrayal and the king's principled response shocked you as profoundly as it did us, you absolutely must hit that like button and subscribe immediately. We uncover the stories that others cannot or will not tell, the secrets that explain the headlines, the truth that hides in plain sight. Do not miss a single story. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue exposing what really happens when duty collides with personal desire. See you in the next video.